Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cappuccino with HR. My name is Rudi Bauer, and after 40 years in business, I'm 100% sure that the success of companies is directly related to the passion of the people working for these companies. With the Cappuccino of HR, we created a format where we really invite people. It's HR leaders, it's recruiters, it's talent acquisition guys, and we're talking about all the different kind of topics. And the range is going from AI, of course, to new work, to leadership, and all the challenges along the way. Yeah, hello and welcome to a new episode of Cappuccino with HR. And today I'm really pleased and happy to have Emily Firth with me. I met Emily in Amsterdam. I was listening to some of her really, really great talks, and she's the co-founder of a company called TheTruthWorks, which I really love. On the name itself is telling a story already. And Emily, welcome at Cappuccino with HR.
Thanks for having me, and glad you like the name. It does indeed do what it says on the tin. We are an organizational culture consultancy who are all about truth, but also the impact that truth can have within your organization. Because if we aren't honest about the problems that we face as organizations, then we can't bridge that gap between employees and employer. So that's what we spend our time doing, advocating for and talking about all day long.
Yeah. And probably for some people that don't know you, may I ask you to introduce you briefly yourself, please?
Sure, of course.
Firstly.
So I'm Emily Firth. I'm a Brit, as maybe you can hear, but I have been in Amsterdam in the Netherlands for about 13 years now. So I like to think of myself as a Brexit escapee and more of a European than a islander. And I previously was working in more of the marketing and communication space, but I quickly fell in love with the world of all things company culture, employer branding, employee experience. So I like to think I translate those storytelling skills and those market differentiation skills to the world of culture. And been doing this for a while now. I co-founded TheTruthWorks with my business partner, Rhiannon Stroud, who has a background in EX as well, super smart. And together we run I guess we would call ourselves a small but scaling business that punches well above our weight and has colleagues all around the world now.
That's really, really cool. As the format is called Cappuccino with HR, I mean, there's a question which I have to ask you. What is your favorite coffee?
Okay, so I used to be a flat white oat milk kind of gal, but I'm weaning myself off it. So actually now I have like a power coffee because I've started weightlifting. So I say I started, I've been doing it for a year now. So I would normally have a black coffee before doing that. And then I try not to have anything else the rest of the day, but really I don't enjoy it.
Today we are talking about probably a really new buzzword, because when I joined the HR ecosystem 10-15 years ago, I was really impressed by how many buzzwords there are. So I think at this time it was work 4.0, and it was more for talents, of course, and some others. Then it was replaced by employer branding, which showed up later on. And now we've got I heard it probably a couple of weeks ago when I did the preparation for this talk the first time. It's called high agency cultures.
Yeah.
Could you briefly explain what you see behind it? What's your take on high agency cultures? What does it mean? Why is it useful? Why is it needed?
Yeah, so it's sort of both new and not new. It's a term that's been around for a while, but it's sort of come back into vogue, mainly because we are, I guess, witnessing through our mobile phones the sort of extreme example of high agency, which is someone like Elon Musk, basically dismantling an organization in 5 minutes in sort of a very empowered way with no sort of boundaries. So I think it's sort of come back in that idea that tech companies who move fast and break things have it right, and that all other organizations that don't let people be fully empowered to just take charge, move fast, take action and get to results quickly are doing something wrong. The debate we've been having actually in TheTruthWorks is that right for every organization? Can every organization really make themselves into a high agency culture, and what does that even mean? So we can explore that a bit more as we talk. But I think equally it gets used for individuals as well as cultures. So we talk about high agency individuals in the same way that people have always talked about the rock stars or the ninjas, the people that operate kind of within the rules, but also break any sort of barrier in their way to get to that outcome. And that's what I think a lot of companies think they want, they ask for, but then culturally, the culture doesn't necessarily support that.
Hmm. But I mean, if you want to implement that kind of culture, I mean, it doesn't start at the door of the companies. Probably it starts at kindergarten, because at the end of the day, I think it needs a hell of a lot of braveness.
Yes. And I think what we sometimes do is think that the braveness has to be with the individual. But actually, to enable someone to be brave at work, you actually need to create psychological safety. You need to create a safe space for that. You need to drive a culture with a high tolerance for risk. You need to reward that kind of behavior and make sure that it isn't punished when it goes wrong. So there's a lot of factors at play. And I think people believe that it's sort of an inherent trait in people to be high agency, but I think you can train high agency.
And I mean, for me, I'm now in this kind of crazy situation. If I think on the economic situation out there in Europe, or probably all over the world, on one hand, I think if you are in a crisis, and I think nobody can now neglect this, there is a crisis at the moment. So, does it mean we should right now it's the best time to get into this kind of model, or should we wait until times have changed better? Because I mean, normally companies tend to go down with being risky and reduce all the risks to be on the safe side. But shouldn't it be the opposite?
Super interesting question. I mean, I think there is something different happening this time. So normally you would say, yes, there's absolutely two ways to go in a time of crisis. You either sort of become more risk averse and just play the safe game, or you're the kind of company that seizes the opportunity. And there are lots of success stories from history about the companies that sort of seize the momentum in a crisis, that are very true. I think we've got a bit of a different situation this time in the sort of craziness of change, the things that are outside of our control as businesses, but also the proliferation of AI and the fact that AI is forcing us to be more high agency. So if you're the competitor that is, for example, embracing AI, letting their teams take more risks with that technology, and also, letting team members drive some of the pace of that change as well, because you will have some people who are naturally quite tech savvy and who've kind of embraced tech and are like, do you know what? I can solve this problem 10 times faster if you let me do it using this methodology and this tech. I think companies are either going to have to kind of embrace that risk and that ability to give their teams more agency, or they're going to run from it. And I think in this instance with AI, we are going to have to move faster. That said, the risk is also higher. So the risk of kind of saying to your teams, yes, use tech in any way you want, go for it, especially when you have super smart developers who can run faster than legislation, who can run faster than a company strategy, that is more leaders. So it's a huge mindset shift for leadership as well. And it's a really difficult time to be a leader.
Mhm. I mean, if I look on what you explain here, and if I look on what I see in the working environment out there, I think it sounds for me it definitely fits to US Americans, but it doesn't really fit to Europeans from the principal mindset that we have. I mean, because at the end of the day, doesn't it mean that we are probably too over-regulated in Europe already for getting there?
I mean, regulation is one thing. I think what I've seen a lot, especially actually with German companies I've worked with, is there is a tendency towards bureaucracy in some cases. And I've seen even tech companies that I perceive to be super fast and innovative from the outside. When I've worked with them internally, I've thought, okay, there are actually a lot of hoops to jump through. If you are a high agency individual, if you are someone that has ideas and you're ready to implement them and you have everything you need, why are you having to write sort of a white paper in order to get something signed off? And I think that is going to hold us back. That said, you need some checks and balances. So what I would never advocate for with a company is complete freedom. It doesn't make any sense.
No, definitely.
What we're talking about is freedom within clear frameworks. And I think that's what people often misunderstand about high agency. They think it just means giving everyone carte blanche to do whatever they want. And actually, it's the opposite. It's about saying, here is the playground, here are the parameters, here are the checks and balances we absolutely need to have, but then otherwise go for it. We trust you. It's also holding people accountable then for meeting those checks and balances and taking those safety measures and those precautions. It's not micromanaging them to do it, but it is saying that there are consequences if you don't, and being super clear on where the risk parameters are. And I think that's what some companies are very bad at doing. There is either, the sense that we can't clearly communicate where the risk is, so we just have to watch you in case we see it. Or we ignore the risk completely and say, move fast and break things. And we'll always ask, but what if the thing you're breaking is actually really hard to put back together or really hard to undo? We've seen it with companies like Facebook who talks about moving fast and breaking things. What broke? Well, democracy. So I think it's really important to have those safeguards in place. I think companies just need to move fast to create parameters in which colleagues can play if they want them to have more agency.
What I have recognized in my career is that a lot of companies, I think, still suffer from not having a kind of a midterm to long-term vision, which really gives you then the ability to move around. Because at the end of the day, for me, it means a little bit we count from 3 to 0. I mean, normally we are trained if somebody counts 3, 2, 1, go. We know we should start moving. And if you don't have a kind of a clear direction, if you don't have a kind of a clear vision, mission, and target, this freedom leads to that people are moving in different directions, and then you have to probably need 1 quarter to really collect them back again and to bring them to the starting point. Are we good enough in communicating or setting this vision? Do we have the vision in European companies? Because sometimes I have the feeling that if it take automotive as an example, I mean, it's going from, yes, everyone has to build electric cars, then we're moving back to diesel, then we're moving back to benzene, then we're moving back to, so at the end of the day, for me, it looks a little bit like, okay, if something happens on the market, we react on it. But it's not my approach. But I think for this kind of high agency culture, you need a really clear target as well at the end of the day, because otherwise you lose the people on the way.
Absolutely. I think so. Just to sort of address a few points in what you've said. Yes, absolutely. The key to real high agency is actually everyone knowing what they're supposed to be doing and what the priorities are, because then they can run at them faster. What I think people often underestimate is how important communicating that clearly to colleagues is, and having it somewhere visible and visualized in a simple, accessible way that colleagues can just get it. And also mapping all of their strategic priorities up to your strategic priorities as a company, so everyone knows which direction they're running in. It sounds super simple, but the amount of companies that don't do it well is always surprising. And I think being a good communicator in explaining what everyone in the company's role is within that vision, because sometimes have a great vision, but it can feel really disconnected from your day to day. So companies listen to the all hands and they'll say, amazing, we're going to Mars, or whatever it is we're doing this week. And then they'll be like, but my job doesn't really involve that. What I do is I'm coding to help, consumers do X, Y, Z. So I think it's really important that everyone can see their role in it and that there is clear alignment there. I think it's okay to change direction as well. I think the reality is things are changing so fast. If you're not relatively agile with your strategy, you're in trouble. Ideally, there will be some fixed elements. So we always talk about sort of the truth triangle and those core foundational elements. So ideally, your vision and mission shouldn't change with the wind every 6 weeks or every year. That should feel fairly constant. Similarly, your values and behaviors, the way you do things that are codified within your organizational culture should feel consistent and clear for colleagues. They understand what behaviors are desirable, what behaviors aren't. and they understand what you value most as a company, those key principles that you're not going to compromise on in pursuit of your vision, that should all feel foundational and baked into the sort of tissue of your culture. What can shift is the strategy to get there. So it might be, okay, we're going to Mars, but actually the way to go to Mars is not through building this. It's actually going to be through partnerships and something else. So ideally your strategy can be fairly fluid. Again, the key is communication, because if you're changing all the time, you have to bring people on that journey. You can't just assume that because you've put it in a slide deck on a, once it's sort of one and done. You have to keep reselling it to your people, and refining it as you go, and listening to them as well. I think the other mistake is not listening when colleagues say this strategy doesn't work or not delivering the outcomes we expect. And that also comes down to high agency, right? How much are you creating an environment where your colleagues can not only run at problems fast, and with all empowerment, but they also are empowered to put the brakes on and say, hang on, this isn't working. We want to make a change.
Mhm. What do you think is the role of HR, as this podcast is mainly going to the HR people out there in the HR ecosystem? What is the role of HR in setting up or bringing companies into this kind of high agency culture direction?
Yeah. Well, I think HR's role is huge, but they can't do it without having the ear of leadership, and they can't do it without being a true partner to leaders. So I think their role is to guide and advise. It's also to speak truth to power, which is hard. Often leaders we work with, which is why sometimes they ask to work with us, because we can kind of come in and do that with them. Showing the data to back it up and showing where the gaps are, maybe, because a leader will always tell you, or often tell you, they want high agency, but what they're thinking about is high agency individuals. They're not thinking about high agency culture. And actually, create a high agency culture involves them being better at leadership as well, and also having a real conversation about their appetite for risk and where the parameters are. So if leaders can help define that, HR can help implement that and bake it into the culture through every touch point. So it might be, defining the A player that you want. So when leaders say, I want an A player, I want a high agency, rockstar ninja A player, whatever phrase you need, really sitting down and challenging that with leadership up front. So what do we want? Okay. And then if we brought in someone who demonstrated these kind of behaviors, would we be actually genuinely comfortable with that? And would that kind of person be set up for success here? So actually, once you start to unravel that and challenge that in real practical terms with leaders, what I find is it goes very quickly from a statement that's easy to make to understanding the implications of what hiring people with those expectations and those skills and that drive actually have on your culture. And then you can start getting into organizational culture and getting the remit as an HR leader to start changing and shaping some of those things.
As you're working with a lot of organizations, Emily, what do you think are the probably 2 to 3 biggest roadblockers in leadership at the moment? So where are we really weak in probably European leadership teams? Do you have 2 or 3 in mind?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting question. I think what we see quite a lot is a little bit of maybe decision paralysis, because things are so changeable at the moment. Making big decisions, for example, to fix problems properly, instead of looking for the quick fixes when budgets are tight, when you have other priorities, thinking that organizational culture is something you can kind of fix down the line, or thinking that it can be fixed with the right campaign or the right employer branding, and not actually looking at the root causes of the problem. So slowing down to speed up, I guess, would be the summary of that. Looking at the hard stuff, and actually being prepared to tackle it. So I think that's a big thing we see. I think a lot of leaders maybe don't necessarily understand or are ready for the changing nature of what it means to be a leader in these times, and how much colleagues are really looking to leaders to demonstrate that integrity and clarity on what they stand for, but also the direction of travel. If leaders are feeling unstable, imagine how colleagues are feeling. They are feeling, am I going to have my job tomorrow? Am I going to be able to put food on the table? Am I going to be able to upskill myself in the areas that I will need in the future to be able to have a job at all? So there's a lot of fear, and fear leads to mistrust. So I think leaders also need to step up and be able to bridge that gap. And that takes different skills. That takes empathy, it takes understanding, it takes investment, and it takes being a clear communicator. I think sometimes what leaders think is the only way to communicate is with good news, or the only things their colleagues want to hear is sort of, everything's great. And actually what colleagues are looking for is honesty often. And you don't have to tell them everything, but I think being able to tell colleagues, look, I can't promise you that you're going to have a job in 3 years. What I can promise you is this business is investing in upskilling you in the areas that we know are emerging, or that we know are important, for example. So talk about what's in your control. Talk about what they can do to be more high agency in their own journey as well, So I think it's all linked, but I think, of course, leaders are anxious. Of course, it's a difficult time to be a leader. They're also trying to upskill themselves on new things as well. But yeah, being clear, being honest, being open, being prepared to be occasionally vulnerable, and say you don't have all the answers is also okay. Having a clear vision and being prepared to tackle the difficult stuff as well as the sort of easy wins.
Mhm. I mean, as we all have kind of a lot of personal experiences if it comes to job changes. I mean, depending how long you are in the business, but as you're dealing a lot with employer branding and with companies and talking about employer branding, helping them set up a decent employer branding campaigns, what does it mean from the recruiting and employer branding perspective to find and attract these kind of talents that you probably need for the change within your organization? Because it's a total different kind of skill set. Yeah. Soft or hard skill set that you probably are going to attract if you want to move into that direction. Because normally people tend to come into an organization and they listen to what the management or the leaders say, and then they're just probably just doing it.
So what I am talking a lot to companies about now is this sort of concept of internal and external. We have this culture internally, we can sell this culture externally. Doesn't fly anymore. We're speaking to a developer audience with you today. Developers are some of the most savvy, no BS audience you'll ever target from an employer brand perspective. They do their homework, they talk to each other, they're super connected in communities that you are probably not marketing in. So just treat your people well and your employer brand will follow. It sounds simple, but I think companies trying to backpedal from very public mistreatment of employees is actually, they're going to find it a hard road. It has not gone unnoticed that Meta fired a load of people saying they were low performers, and then those low performers called out the company in public spaces, because those things don't stay internal anymore. And they damage a company's reputation and their employer brand, and they damage your employer brand for quite some time as well. So, taking Meta as an example, being that employer brand manager, being that head of people, now needing to attract people, the questions your recruiters are going to get, if people even come in through the door, are going to be much, much tougher. I think the interesting thing is a lot of people leaders, a lot of leaders want people who are so passionate about the journey that they're on. What I see far too much is companies leaning into what they do, not how they treat people or what they offer. So they will say, help us build, the future of X technology, or help us reimagine, the tax industry, whatever it is. They talk about what they do, but the reality is, whilst talent are interested in solving those problems, they are never going to be as passionate about solving those problems unless you're, brokering world peace, as you, the founders and leaders, are. What they are interested in, how it's going to set them up for success, what they're going to learn. So we often miss those deeper layers of what's in it for me. Especially when the company is doing something interesting or game changing, they think that's enough. But when times are hard and careers are changeable, and you can be fired from high profile companies and called out on a dime, you are perhaps less interested in what the company does and more what they show you about how they treat their people.
Do you see with this high agency approach and culture, as it means at the end of the day, it needs braveness, it needs flexibility, it needs speed, it needs passion in a way. Yeah. Do you see the danger that it's more attracting this kind of ego types or alpha animal types and they are then leave a lot of burnt ground if you don't manage them and lead them well? Because when normally take Elon Musk as an example. I mean, this guy, honestly, I think he's giving a shit on what others think about what he does. Yeah. So at the end of the day, I think it's really a little bit like, yeah, if you give the people the freedom and you have this kind of really tough ego types in your organization, so probably they stop listening to something after 5 meters. Yeah. Do you see this risk?
I'm really glad you asked that, and it's one of the things that I challenge back when people talk about, want A players, etc. Do you want your culture to be full of brilliant jerks? And what is the risk to your business and your culture if you do have a load of brilliant jerks? That is why having a clear behavior framework is so important, and clear values. Because if you don't have those clearly defined, you use words like be bold, take risks, etc., and you've not qualified that and codified that with clear sets of behaviors that say, okay, but in doing this, you need to have the data to back it up. You need to work as a team still. You need to make sure you've brought the right people in at the right time. Like, that's still ownership. Ownership doesn't mean just like acting on your own in a silo and, everyone else be damned, because that's not realistic. Because there's very, very rarely that the project you're working on or the stream you're working on does not have an impact on someone else's work. So being high agency, if you have the right behaviors, can also be about being an influencer within the organization, being a positive disruptor, being someone who knows exactly who to pull in when and how to convert them to your way of thinking. That's the kind of positive disruption I certainly look for in hires. But I think without those qualifying behaviors, with clear expectation setting, both of, in your job descriptions and your hiring process, but also baked into your culture and your performance management and your learning and development, all of those great things, you end up exactly that. You've hired a load of A players, you've hired a load of brilliant jerks, and your culture suffers for it. And probably your business does as well, to be honest.
Mm. That is also the risk that I probably see if it don't lead it right. Yeah. So I think that's really important. I've as the time is passing by so quickly, and we are really coming to the end of the session already, so we could probably talk for another 2 hours or 3 hours. It's really great fun to listen to you and to share your thoughts. One question that I have still in mind is, do you have an example or some examples you can name of European companies that are good in building up these agents? Do you have some names, or do you have some kind of companies that you have in mind that are really have been good in setting this up?
I can't speak to whether they've nailed it yet, but we did briefly do some work with Loop. I don't know if you know those guys. And I was certainly impressed with their ambition to be a high agency culture, their commitment to working with us to defining what they perceive to be an A player, and their confidence as well in defining the type of culture they wanted. I think often what you see when you talk to leaders is they haven't quite figured out what their version of high agency is, and they were certainly quite confident and quite clear on what their culture was and wasn't. And also was sort of comfortable with the bits that were uncomfortable as well. This won't be for everyone. And often, and they're just one example, but I think they're growing fast and attracting talent. So I assume it's working. But I think it's the companies that are confident in who they want to be, are not concerned about the fact that won't please everyone, and are able to communicate that in a way that is still appealing, and actually deliver on the promise and expectations that they set, and be consistent in managing those people, I think are really successful. Obviously, sort of at the other end of the spectrum, you saw Netflix were famous for very many years talking about no rules, and I think a lot of companies adopted that without really looking at the sort of culture that sat underneath that. So it's like, great, we'll all do the same thing. We don't need rules. And of course, it's much easier to say we don't need frameworks, we don't need processes. But I think even they are looking at building even more structure underneath what they mean by that and where the parameters are and what behaviors and expectations there are underneath that. Because a high level vision and philosophy is great, but it's actually the rigor and the structure underneath that, especially as you grow and become successful. The risks obviously become really high with not getting it right. So I think they're building more rigor from what I can see, you know, in the updates to their culture guide and things like that as well.
Mhm. And the last question that I have in mind, because I mean, as many companies are trying to get into this high agency culture mode, is it misspelled or probably misinterpreted by just having quick performance improve? So, I mean,
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? So normally as leaders, they want get quick sales performance. Yeah, I want to have this kind of alpha things or the ninjas in my organization because they bring me quick results.
Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely, from my point of view, that's not going to work, because if that's the approach, I think it would definitely fail. What's your take on this?
Definitely. Well, I mean, we also work with organizations that have sales teams where they talk about, you know, getting more customers, but they're not necessarily talking about who are the right customers, and is that a customer that's going to stay, or are you going to having to feed that machine? And what's your aftercare? Yeah, great, you've converted people, but have you actually built a culture of service where you show those customers that you value their business? So I think it's all about sustainable wins. Yes, I mean that with a small s. How are you creating wins that are lasting and aren't just reliant on people spinning their wheels? Because that's also not sustainable in a culture, unless you have built a culture of sort of deep rooted resilience. And resilient cultures are a whole other topic, which we're speaking about the TruthWorks at the moment. In fact, we're actually launching a white paper on how to build resilience as a cultural foundation rather than an individual trait. And it's that same sort of balance, right? It's you can't just keep hiring resilient high agency people who just go and go and go. That doesn't last.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Emily, it was a really pleasure. If somebody wants to get in contact with you, if somebody's interested in what you do with The Truth Works, what's the best way of getting in contact with you?
So they can either email us at info@thetruthworks.co, or they can get in contact with me directly on LinkedIn, or my business partner, Rhiannon Stroud. We are around. We love talking about this stuff. We love speaking about it on stages, and we love helping organizations that are ready to confront those uncomfortable truths and get to better results.
Emily, it was a really pleasure. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you for sharing your expertise and thoughts. I really enjoyed it. I hope the audience does as well, but I'm not 100% sure. It was a pleasure having you. Thank you very much to the audience for listening, and see you in our next episode. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for having me. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Cappuccino with HR. If you enjoy this kind of conversations, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Then you get all this kind of upfront information, your upcoming episodes, and all my nice guests. Cappuccino with HR is brought to you by WeAreDevelopers, Europe's #1 developer community and a leading platform for connecting HR and companies together with developers. If you want to learn more, visit us on WeAreDevelopers.com. Thank you again for watching, and see you next time on Cappuccino with HR.